Hey everyone, this is smpratte, and today we're going to talk about why Metazoo failed, and more importantly, why most TCGs will fail. I hope you like this exclusive merch. They sent me this over the years. I just opened all the packages today for the first time, and I think they wanted an advertisement video, but now that it's all said and done, that Metazoo is finally over and they failed, now I think it's appropriate to do the advertisement video that they always wanted. By the way, I am burning up over here. It's like Cinnabar Island. So, why Metazoo failed is like a canary in the coal mine situation, and to give them some credit, they are a larger canary. There were a lot of pandemic Kickstarters that were dead in the water that didn't last a day. I'm not exaggerating. I probably received over 50 emails in 2020 and 2021 of people who wanted to pitch some crypto infused blockchain, NFT, vertical integration startup, and 90% plus were just gone day one. So this did last a few years. However, there are three big reasons why Metazoo failed and why most TCGs failed. And number one is too much hype. Metazoo had way too much hype versus organic interest. It was completely imbalanced. It was dead obvious for people who've been here for a while, and probably dead obvious for people who haven't been here for a while. It was something I think most of us noticed. It was very peculiar. It was borrowing a lot of the energy from Pokemon without the organic roots of Pokemon. So why something like Pokemon stood the test of time is because of that engagement. It's the same for Magic the Gathering. It's the same for any collectible that has gone a decade plus. You have some personal, intimate experience with it. And with Pokemon, it's great because you can share that multiple ways. You know, things like merchandise or the video games or the trading card game or the anime, they throw all that out there. But more importantly, it sticks because you have some intimate engagement. You go deeper with it. It's very easy to throw out surface stuff, and that's what hype is. Hype is temporary, fundamentals are forever. Hype comes and goes, fundamentals never die. And that's what Pokemon has. It has this rich engagement that goes beyond generations, beyond languages, beyond everything. It's a global phenomenon. It's why it is the highest grossing media franchise. It's not because of all this, who's saying it, what celebrities collabing and all that stuff. That's surface area. But that's really what majority of Metazoo was. It was very surface level. It had a lot of hype, and it tried to borrow a lot of that noise and energy from Pokemon, but without the roots. That's the most important thing. And to really elaborate on that, it's why you have so much success with things like Nintendo overall. Not just Pokemon, but go look at like the Nintendo Switch. It's outselling its competitors, and it's not even in 4K. Like, they're like, yeah, we don't even need to do 4K. Like, we'll just stick to 1080p, and we're still going to just roll through everybody because they go deep into it. They have those core IPs that have this higher level of engagement. And I think that is what you see in Pokemon. I think that's why it's successful. It's why you're tuning in now, probably. And it's why I think a lot of people latched onto this in some way. And the caveat here, which I'll say multiple times in this video, I do feel bad for people who genuinely like this, who got into it and actually enjoyed it, because you always had that. When I say there was too much hype, it doesn't mean all hype. It just means there was too much of it. It could have been majority, it could have been like 30% or whatever, but there are definitely amount of people that enjoyed this on a real level. And I always feel bad for people who do that because it's something that brought positivity to them. So that's the biggest thing. Number one is that way too much hype is temporary, fundamentals are forever. Fundamentals are what sustain collectibles, and it's what sustains and makes other cards thrive within collectibles versus energy cards or whatever it may be. Number two is too much imitation. Metazoo basically looks like that knockoff Pokemon thing your grandma bought you back in the 90s. Like, no, we don't need the Pokemon in the store because we got Pokemon home vibe. Like, that's what Metazoo felt like in general, especially for a lot of Pokemon people. And that's because they did a lot of one-to-one, imitations. One of them being the first edition stamp. I don't know if it's on these boxes. This is the first time I ever looked at these boxes. Yeah, right here. This thing right here is basically a one-to-one carbon copy of the Japanese Pokemon first edition stamp. So it's something that with imitations, they're like clones. They have a half-life. That's the reality. Ditto is always going to lose. Ditto's a cute Pokemon. I like Ditto, but he's always going to lose because he's got to waste that turn transforming because everything about him is just copying something else. So without that, he's just a pink blob. That's what it is. And that's kind of the same vibe of Metazoo, is that there's too much imitation going on. I think the first edition stamp is a big one. The card layout was another. It was trying to grab this nostalgia, again, borrowing from the energy of other successful TCGs like Magic or WotC era Pokemon. The borders are really reminiscent of that. And sure, at a glance for some of us, these boomer millennial collectors are like, oh yeah, I remember that. I remember the, you know, the watercolor art that looks like Sugimori, but it's not Sugimori. And again, positive caveat here for artists who are full-time, there was some decent art there. You know, the frog guy, like I'm gonna say something, he was in one of these promotions I opened. That frog was my favorite one, and the style is something that can transcend, you know, even if it's well intended. I think that's something to say there in a positive light. Even if this imitation was well intended, it still is like a clone. It's gonna have a half-life. So that's the rundown of too much of imitation. You got to have your own vibe. Like Magic is not Pokemon, right? Like Pokemon is like, we got Jigglypuffs just floating around. We got like happy Peekaboos and Marrows just like frolicking through the field, you know, being happy. And then Magic's like pouring out blood into like a goblet and drinking it because they're so hardcore and edgy. It's like two different things that both have their own vibe and both do it well. You know, and I think that takes us into the third point, which is the biggest one here, and which is why most TCGs fail. Not just Metazoo. Most 90+% of TCGs will fail because making a successful trading card game is insanely difficult. In fact, I don't know a challenge that's... You probably have a better shot at getting into the MLB. What was that stat recently about baseball? It's like there's only been 20,000 or 21,000 people ever in the history of the game to play professionally. That's still a better odd. You have a better chance than making a successful TCG because it is insanely difficult. It is so hard. When I said the thing about the Kickstarters, that's number one. So many people try to do this thing where it's like, let's just get everyone talking about it. Let's generate a bunch of buzz. You know, let's try to just throw all this advertisement out there. And that's what Metazoo did. And that's what a lot of people did before Metazoo. You know, this is something that has come and gone. We've had so many imitations, Pokemon, you know, you name it. That's a throwback for people around back then. There's a lot of knockoffs that tried to happen and took a nosedive. But I think a better example of this is take Magic the Gathering. You got Richard Garfield, who's like nothing short of a genius in my opinion. If you don't know, this guy created Magic the Gathering. It's so unbelievable to say, like, somebody made that game. It's like Magic is by far the most competitive TCG and probably always will be. It's just something you think always existed. Like it's just always been there, like gravity or something. Like it's always just there. So it's nuts that somebody created it, you know, and that's what Richard Garfield did. He made the most competitive and most engaging TCG. It goes so deep, it feels never ending. However, Richard Garfield has made a lot of other games that none of us can name. Because there are plenty of other failures out there that happen. Even people who make God tier level, just Magic the Gathering is it. It's the bar for TCGs. Also have plenty of failures. Even subtle things like, let's take Bungie and Halo. The Bungie Halo era was pure Magic. And I'm one of those people who doesn't like 343 as much. I still try to enjoy it, but it's just not the same. Even with Bungie, who made that Magic with Halo, it didn't entirely translate to Destiny the same way. So my point is that making successful franchises is very difficult. I would even throw in there that like gamers are a sensitive bunch. You know, we are critical, we're detail oriented. It's a passion, you know, it's something that we're letting into our lives and engaging with. So when you have this thing that is pitched and pitched and pitched and forced down your throat and hyped and hyped and hyped, surprisingly your body's going to reject that. Most people who are trying to like get into it, you know, are going to reject that. And I think that's something that I felt myself, is that I want to enjoy as many collectibles as I can. I know I need to rotate out like the grandma basement background here, but I do pretty much everything. You know, when people ask me about other collectibles, I do video games. Within video games, there's such a spread. It's like I have my Sega Genesis stuff on the shelf above. I have my Nintendo 64 stuff. You know, I do open games. I have cards. I have sealed. So like even with under one umbrella, I'm just constantly collecting. So like naturally, I want to like it. You know, I look at stuff and I'm like, yeah, I really wish I would just like this more, but I don't. You know, I think that's where a lot of people landed with not only Metazoo, but a lot of these TCGs, where it's like, okay, you're borrowing this stuff, but again, that half-life kicks in. And I think that's why it did last for a few years, because it runs on the fumes of borrowing these ideas, which are, again, to give credit, better than a lot of the other Kickstarters. Like the other Kickstarters just like AI-generated like pixel llamas or something, you know, just straight into the ground. So there is something to be said, but ultimately, without fundamentals, hype is just going to be blown around the wind. You know, there's nothing cementing you. And I cannot beat this dead horse any harder, that the engagement is what it's all about. You have to have that engagement. You know, when people now, like our generation, I'm so happy to see it. You know, there's a lot of costs now of growth with Pokemon, obviously, but I'm so happy to see how ubiquitous it is today. That was always the dream. I remember when I started, it's like, you got to be a closet collector and like, dodge the bombastic side eyes from people and the judgment, where now it's like, you can talk about Pokemon openly. It's accepted. It's trendy. And that's because we all had this experience and it's shared, and it's something that we can all relate to with one another. And that's what a lot of these TCGs lack. If they just get you with engagement, and it's not like new things don't happen. Like, remember when Skyrim happened? Remember when these new games just happen? Like, new games can exist. Like, new things can happen. I think the world we're in today, it's easier to churn and burn. It's easier to let GTA 5 just run on shark cards, indefinitely. Like, we're going to do, I love all the memes where it's like, we have a real lightsaber before GTA 6, or like, we have real aliens before GTA 6. But like, that's the world we're in today. It's easier to get into the hype. It's easier to generate noise. It's easier to collab and do those type of surface level things than it is to really get down into it. And getting down into it is what keeps and makes all this stuff going. It's what makes it thrive. And again, Japan, Nintendo, they go deep. When you watch, like, last little bit here, when you watch any documentary or Did You Know Gaming on like how they made Super Smash Bros. Melee, how they made Majora's Mask, just go a deep dive into those videos. These guys are getting like no sleep. They're like losing their minds because it's nothing but just developing this game. And it's not just like, we're going to develop it to like make most noise. It's like, no, I want to make it the best game ever. That's why Melee to this day is played more competitively than like Ice Skating Brawl. Like, you're just sliding around and floating. Kind of, there's too much hype in Brawl. If we want to make that dad joke, like, you're just floating around that game, where Melee is so tight, the controllers are so precise, because that person basically gave it all. And that's not uncommon in Japan. With Pokemon, they give it their all. They go so deep into it. There's so much thought into it. That's why you have everybody, every generation, who can find something they enjoy with it. Where Metazoo lacked a lot of that. It tried to borrow, the surface level stuff, and that's why it failed, and that's why most TCGs will fail. So last thing here to say for positive, my heart does go out for people who enjoyed this. I definitely saw, people who were through E4 or wherever else that really just enjoyed it. It was a strong minority. That's how I'd classify it, because a lot of it, again, today there's so much energy around quick flip, quick everything. Everything's instant. Like, if I haven't made money 5 seconds ago, I don't care. That's a perspective for a lot of people, and a lot of that energy gravitated towards us. It really drew, it was like a bug light for that, So that's, I think, the conundrum there is for people who really enjoyed it. They were a strong minority. And again, this failed because it didn't have that engagement. It just lacked its own individuality. It tried to copy too much, and ultimately, making a TCG is one of the hardest things you do. If you came to me and said, here's infinite amounts of money, go figure it out, I don't know if I could produce that answer. It's so difficult to do. So that's the rundown on it. That's pretty much everything I have. This will be my first and last ever Metazoo video, but more importantly, this is why, in my opinion, most TCGs will fail. But as usual, guys, you know the deal. Let me know how I feel. It's pretty much it. Till next time.